Welcome to our special guest, one of the leading emerging market specialists in the finance world, Ozan Ozkural. Having spent over 10 years as an investment banker focusing predominantly on emerging markets financing, Ozan is now the co-founder and managing partner of Tanto Capital Partners, a global opportunities fund and advisory firm. He's in the process of launching with his business partner, Ibrahim Taher. Given his experience in this field, we want to talk about the future of emerging markets with Ozan, touching on both the challenges and opportunities surrounding this region, how geopolitics plays a role in the way emerging markets operate, and what this means when it comes to the availability of financing in these jurisdictions. You were born in Turkey, right?
That's
and
right.
live in London.
In London.
Okay. How did you get into this field?
I always liked finance. My father is a banker. My grandfather was a banker. So I started my career, actually, funny enough, in a non-banking industry, and then got into investment banking around 2004. I started work at Merrill Lynch, and the rest is history.
Why did you decide to go on your own?
Well, what happened after post-Lehman in 2008 is that we've been seeing a lot of pullback of capital from investment banks in terms of the kind of deals that we were used to doing. So before Lehman and after Lehman is obviously quite two distinct, different worlds that we used to live in. So after 2008, slowly but surely, we've seen investment banks willing yet unable to finance the kind of transactions that we've been used to doing within emerging markets. And what you currently have right now is that a lot of the deals that we do, which are quite intricate for the development of those countries, focusing on oil and gas and infrastructure, get financed via private capital instead of investment banking. And this is referred to as shadow banking. So we thought, my partner Ibrahim Taher, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, and we decided to basically launch this franchise because we wanted to basically capture the opportunity that exists in this market for funds and for advisory firms like ours in order to capture the business opportunities.
Was working with Merrill Lynch beneficial?
Absolutely, of course.
Did you take to it right away?
I did. I started my career in the principal investments and financing, so the quasi-private equity side of the firm. Obviously, when you're a junior guy, it takes you a long time to get to be in front of clients and to basically work with the principals in different jurisdictions. But I mean, my years in Merrill, we invested and executed transactions of over $48 billion in different jurisdictions, so absolutely.
How old are you?
Just about to turn 35.
You're really young in this field, right? Well, there are a lot of young in this field, aren't there?
It tends to be a young industry, and it's just because I think people burn out after a while.
You travel, you must travel a lot.
I travel all the time.
So you're based in London, right?
I'm based in London. What we are doing is also setting up an office in Istanbul as well, and looking to get into joint venture agreements within Asia and Latin America.
So when we talk about emerging markets, what do we mean? Who are the emerging markets?
I think it's a great question, because people often refer to emerging markets as just one broad brushstroke, saying this is emerging markets and there it is. But the reality is the countries within the emerging markets differ significantly from each other. At one end of the spectrum, we have the famous BRICS, so Brazil, Russia, India, China. With the exception of Brazil and Russia, for obvious reasons recently, those countries actually obviously command a lot of the GDP growth within emerging markets
Russia,
globally.
India, China.
Russia, India, China, and Brazil, in particular China and India. Just India and China combined is 2.5 billion people. And then you have countries that are referred to as rapid growth markets, like Mexico and Turkey, who they don't command the same population numbers, but they do have a very transparent and investor-friendly business environment, who basically are forecast to drive growth in the world over the next 5 to 6 years. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have what we call the frontier emerging markets, such as Nigeria, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and certain Latin American countries, where the risk-reward balance is actually pretty desirable for a lot of the investors out of Western Europe and US. So the spectrum is huge. And actually, within those countries, I would love to talk about a few of those that we think are quite hot and we think that will make a big difference into the world. Within Latin America, we think Mexico is the rising star. Mexico has just passed, over the past year and a half, 11 very significant structural reforms, especially in energy and telecoms that basically allow private capital to come into these fields. And those reforms were not easy. In emerging markets, what you tend to find is that a lot of the reforms that need to get done are delayed because of political pressures, local political concerns. And Mexico has been very brave and have implemented these reforms over the past year and a half. And as a result, you see a lot of investor money going into Mexico, in particular in Latin America.
So what you do is you find people to invest in these markets, right?
We do. We find opportunities. And what we do is we basically match the opportunities, the capital, and the execution capabilities, and basically execute transactions.
And your clients come from where?
All around the world. We are not focused on any particular jurisdiction. We are a global institution. However, we do think that a lot of the opportunities are within certain asset classes and sectors, namely oil and gas, infrastructure, metals and mining, and financials. So therefore, we tend to be pretty much skewed towards emerging markets, heavily skewed towards emerging markets. But to give you an idea, so Mexico is basically a country of target for us. Within what we call the emerging Europe, we think Turkey is a very, very big target. I mean, this is why we're opening our office in Turkey as well. Turkey has gone through tectonic shifts in the reforms over the past 10 years. They opened up, they've implemented the kind of policies that investors find very friendly, investor-friendly effectively, and it offers a very transparent market and basically yield enhancements that investors out of the US, for example, are normally unable to get within the US markets. Yeah.
We'll be right back with Ozan after this. We're back with Ozan Ozkural. He is a partner in Tanto Capital, a global opportunities fund and advisory firm. What does Tanto mean?
Tanto means abundance in Latin.
Really?
It does. Yes, we actually talked about the name for a long time with Ibrahim, and he came up with the name. And the last TO also represents our surnames, Tahir and Ozkural.
But, now, when you start something like this, you leave Merrill Lynch. How do you get started? How do you get your first client?
Actually, after Merrill Lynch, I'd worked for 2 years for a Russian investment bank called VTB Capital, where I used to run the Turkish business. And how you get started is basically you do not want to be doing this or attempt to be doing this in a half-hearted manner. So you and your partner, you have to be aligned 100% in terms of your ambitions and your vision. The macro story has to lend itself to what you're trying to do. And when all the stars align, you just basically have to stick your neck out and basically go for what you think is going to be where the value proposition is. Because Larry, effectively, none of what we do can happen unless you present some sort of inherent value proposition to your clients. Through our connections in the market, through our connections within investment banking, we have access to transactions, we have access to capital, we have access to talent, and because of what's going on in the world post-Lehman, we have deal flow.
So have you taken clients from that you made connections with your other firms?
The beautiful thing is that we are not a competitor to investment banks. We tend to complement them. So whereas investment banks now can mainly focus on more plain vanilla, more straightforward transactions in the jurisdiction, they still need the riskier piece of the puzzle to come and basically get on board to be able to execute the transaction. So it may very well be the case that a Merrill Lynch or a VTB provides the senior financing, and then we come and do the mezzanine, the more riskier financing, and then get these transactions done.
When you learn of a deal, you learn of something, let's say Mexico, you have a client that you take it to. Give me how the process works.
Well, in this case, the process is a little different. Our connections will allow us to tap into the opportunity. So we may have someone sitting on our advisory board that is a prominent Mexican businessman looking for capital, looking for transactions. What is very important in any investment is to be able to understand who your partner is and how you're going to exit. So we bring the capital, we will evaluate the opportunity based on, obviously, the circumstances. And we don't necessarily go and look for the clients as such, but we do have our network, our global network allows us to tap into the opportunities that come our way.
How long have you been in business?
We're just setting up. Just
starting?
Just starting. It's been about 2 months since we have officially incorporated. And we're looking to do our official launch within the first couple of months of the new year.
Do you have to be well capitalized to start this?
Ideally, you do. and you should do. And one, through experience, the one mistake that we've seen a lot of our competitors do is a lot of people that have started this or have attempted to start this have underestimated how difficult this process is. They left their jobs to thinking that they would be able to just basically get capital and then get the transactions and basically just wishful thinking that everything would actually work well. Some didn't get lucky, so therefore they went out of business. So what was very important for both Ibrahim and I in doing this was to basically to make sure that we do have sufficient capital to go forward with.
You make money by getting a percentage of the transaction.
A percentage of the upside of the transaction, that's right. So basically we provide a certain return to our investors and then we have upside sharing with those investors.
Is it difficult dealing with communist countries? China is communist. Isn't that harder to deal with than Mexico?
It's not very easy, but you see, every jurisdiction has a certain way of doing business. And I'm glad that you asked that question because, again, talking about China in particular, what we are seeing as part of the whole emerging markets growth is that a lot of these countries are becoming much more prominent and are opening up to business versus how they were previously. I mean, right now, within the past G20 meetings, US and China are actively pursuing their own policies in terms of how to manage Asia. Now, Obama is trying to get the Trans-Pacific Partnership idea in place, whereas China is pushing for the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank route. Both are excluding each other, but the reality is when you take a look at a region like Asia, for example, where just to be able to finance the investments that Asia needs over the next 10 years, you're looking at $8 trillion, right? So when you have this kind of amount of money in play and the necessity to be able to execute transactions, countries like China, they have to open up. I worked a lot with Russia, and Russia in particular right now is going through quite an interesting time. They have their own certain way of doing business. African countries have a certain way of doing business. And each jurisdiction have their pros and their cons.
But how do you learn all that?
Through experience, through executing transactions in different jurisdictions. I mean, you can never learn this quickly.
Do you deal with the oligarchs?
We do.
Okay. What are oil prices? Now, oil's gone down, right?
Oil has gone down.
So what does that do to the markets that have oil?
Absolutely. It does a lot of things to markets that have oil and markets that don't. The decline in oil prices arguably is the most important financial and geopolitical event that has happened in the second half of the year. All in all, a lot of the oil importing countries in the world obviously benefit. The oil exporters are the losers out of this. The question is, why has oil prices gone down?
Why?
And it's a combination of the fact that the growth in the world is slowing down a little bit, especially China. The US dollar is rising, and because of the US shale gas and oil boom, there's an oversupply in the world. However, when you look at different jurisdictions, you see clear winners and losers. For example, a country like Turkey is a clear winner because it's a very high net energy importer. A country like Russia is a clear loser because obviously its economy is dependent very heavily on oil and gas revenues. You look at countries like Saudi Arabia, who used to be the swing producers within OPEC. And recently, a couple of days ago, they've concluded their OPEC meeting and they decided not to cut production, citing the fact that the US now is a big enough oil producer to affect supply. So therefore, there's a lot of geopolitical tensions going on around oil as well. So the question is, how low can it go?
And we'll talk about geopolitics when we come back. We're back with Ozan Ozkural. He and his partner, Ibrahim, am I pronouncing it right?
Ibrahim Tahir.
Tahir. They have launched Tonto Capital, which will boom in 2015, right?
Yes,
take off.
That's the idea.
And we'll be hearing much about it, we hope.
Absolutely.
Geopolitics. You have to deal with the politics of this situation, right?
I mean, geopolitics impact the entire planet, especially emerging markets. I mean, if you take a look around what's happening right now, around let's just pick Middle East, for example. ISIS. You have the Iraqi Kurdish, local battles. You have Russia that have basically annexed a part of Ukraine. In Africa, you have Boko Haram. In Asia, you have the territorial battles with China and its neighbors. So therefore, it's impossible for these things not to affect business overall.
So doesn't that make people, when you see ISIS and all these things, fearful of investments?
Well, it depends on how much they know emerging markets, and this is a part of the reason why there is an opportunity within emerging markets for institutions and private capital such as ours. Yes, there's a risk, and risk is not really a bad thing as long as you can manage it and you can mitigate it. Certain jurisdictions obviously have it worse. You talk about ISIS and what's going on in that jurisdiction. You have to be able to read the situation quite well to understand how that impacts, oil production, how that impacts infrastructure investments, how that impacts certain countries around, where you're doing business. And if you're not able to read those situations, of course, it's actually quite scary. But the reality is, with the very low rates and the yields that investors are getting out of US and Europe, you still see a lot of capital inflow into emerging markets despite these problems that you see with geopolitics.
You got to be pretty sharp to do what you do.
You have to know what you're talking about, basically.
Your family, they support you through this?
Of
Your
course.
father was
Always.
in banking, right?
Always.
Did you learn a lot from him?
I did when I was growing up. Absolutely. We actually traveled the world with him. And the reason why we ended up moving to London back in 1991 was because of him.
Did you have a natural affinity for finance?
I always did. I always knew that I wanted to be in finance since I was a kid.
When you were a whiz kid, what subjects did you do well in? Math?
I mean, normally people always ask that question: math, finance,
economics.
Economics, absolutely.
Wow. Do you train others?
I do. You have to, because you can never do this kind of a thing on your own. You have to manage teams. You have to make sure that people around you also grow and give them the right opportunity to grow, which is what we hope to also do within Tanto as well.
What are the rewards of what you do other than financial? No, you want to be a billionaire, I would assume.
Everyone wants to be a billionaire.
Okay. Right, but what are the rewards?
But the reality is that what I enjoy a lot
Yeah.
is you see a lot of what's going on in the world, how world politics influence finance, business, from that into social problems. And the more you travel and the more you look at different transactions, you get involved with a lot of different politicians to businessmen to decision makers. You get to have a very broad and a holistic picture of what's going on in the world. And that I enjoy that tremendously. Deal making is another one. I mean, yes, of course, we are doing this to create a value for our investors and return for ourselves. But the reality is, if you're not enjoying it, and if you don't enjoy the whole deal making part of it, then you may as well not try.
How do you deal with, as everyone has to deal with, those deals that fail?
Well, you have to understand that you can never get them all 100% correctly. But what you do have to do is to make sure that you have a very healthy pipeline, and so you're working on more than one transaction at a go, to make sure that you overall create the kind of returns that you're promising your investors. But again, in terms of the kind of jurisdictions that we target and what we do, you have to really understand geopolitics. You have to really understand financing. You have to really understand how it all links into different parts of the world. And to give you an idea, we're looking at certain jurisdictions, looking to set up in certain jurisdictions. Why have we preferred Turkey over, say, Dubai? Because Turkey brings a certain positivity to the kind of deals that you want to do. They have made the right structural reforms, similar to Mexico, within our jurisdiction. Now, if you did not know this market well, and if you were just basically doing it blindly, then we would have been indifferent. We could have done Dubai, we could have done some other places. So,
how is all this affected by the new technology?
Well, technology is, I think, is a driver of the kind of assets that you're looking at. So we talked about oil and gas. Technology has basically driven the U.S. shale gas and shale oil boom. It doesn't necessarily have an impact directly on how we execute our transactions or how we get together. I mean, clearly it's easier to connect different offices and,
But the information is so swift, right?
It is. But the kind of transactions that we do, the value proposition is always being able to get your hands on off-market transactions.
What kind of people are the most difficult to deal with?
Ooh, that's a loaded question.
I know it's loaded, but it's fair.
I think people that are not necessarily 100% transparent with you in terms of their expectations.
How do you know when they're being transparent?
I think through experience, through testing certain people. You don't always know, and I think you have to be comfortable with the fact that you don't always know.
You're dealing all the time with, I imagine, high-profile investors, right? You're not dealing with the average guy on the street.
No.
Right? You deal with companies, too, that invest.
We deal with companies, we deal with family offices, we deal with individuals, correct.
So you're on the go all the time?
Always. Unfortunately, my fiancée bears the brunt of that, of that problem, but yeah.
You want to have a family someday?
Absolutely.
What's it like living in London?
Beautiful.
We'll be right back with more with Ozan Ozkural. Quite a story. Don't go away. We're back with Ozan Ozkural. The current economy situation. What's your view of how, let's say, Obama's economic policy? The United States, we seem to be in a recovery.
Absolutely. And I think the U.S. is doing very well, especially in comparison to Europe. And that actually itself is driving a lot of the capital flows that we see in the world. Everyone is expecting the Fed to increase interest rates next year, which we think is going to happen. But overall, when you look at the U.S. economy, it's remarkable how a single decision-making body makes a big difference. What I mean by that is that you have one Fed. Fed makes a call on interest rates. You have one government that makes a call on what is necessary for that one country. You look at Europe, they have a much tougher situation to deal with. You have one central bank dealing with a lot of different economies of different size and different realities. So the U.S. Basically showing signs of growth is going to be a major factor in how the global capital flows transact over the next 4 to 5 years. Low energy prices. We think that the low energy prices, the cheap energy rather, is the new cheap labor. For 2 decades, you've seen cheap labor drive a lot of the decision-making behind companies and investing in certain jurisdictions, like in China. You see the arbitrage and wage difference closing, and you see the price differential of energy moving up from different jurisdictions.
Are you optimistic?
About the U.S., absolutely. About the U.S. dollar, 100%.
What happened, like Brazil? Wasn't Brazil booming?
Brazil was booming.
And then what?
And then I think, again, expectation management. Expectation in terms of, what a country offers versus where it's priced at. And I think there was a significant dislocation, which is why countries like Mexico, countries like Turkey, countries like, again, China, despite the fact that China's growth is slowing still, countries like India, India is forecast to take over UK, Italy, and France in terms of its GDP within the next 4 years, are very important for us. Within the Western world, within the developed world, we think that the U.S. is the one place that's going to be driving growth as well.
Are there any small countries you're interested in, like in the Caribbean?
I wish I was. I wish I was, but the smaller countries that we are interested in tend to be in Sub-Saharan Africa. So we are particularly focused on Ethiopia, Mozambique, and we think that those 2 countries offer a significant potential. I mean, Larry, you have to go and see these places. When you go to Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa...
Never been there. I've been to South Africa.
South Africa is very different. Sub-Saharan Africa, you go to these places, you're sitting in a cafe. You look outside, and normally what you would see is a road with cars. Well, these guys don't have that. So they need an incredible amount of infrastructure investment to those countries just to get to a basic standard of living. So therefore, we do think that Sub-Saharan Africa is a tremendous place to invest, being mindful of the fact that you have to be very careful in terms of who you pick as a partner within that jurisdiction.
Because?
Because that makes the entire difference, especially in more close countries like those.
All right. Well, I understand you have 3 key points you want to emphasize.
Yes.
For viewers.
Sure.
What are they?
One of them is that emerging markets is an intricate part of the world economy, and that's a good thing. We are becoming a much more closed society overall, and emerging markets is where we'll see, as a world, growth come from. Structure is the second message is structural reform. Structural reform is very, very important for all countries, but emerging markets in particular. It's not always easy. It usually takes a very strong political will to implement these reforms. But when you look at the kind of investments that these countries need, the world needs to move forward, it is imperative that policymakers, decision makers actually do go ahead, similar to what they've done in Mexico and Turkey. And the third message is that with the U.S. economy moving forward, watch dollar, watch the U.S. economy pick up, and watch oil prices. Those three things will have a significant impact on how we live and go through the next 3 to 4 years.
Do you have a motto you live by?
Always be transparent, always be open, and always go for what you think is, is correct.
You are a driven person, are you not? Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You have to be very careful, though, when you're dealing in market. Like you mentioned Africa. There's a lot of trust here, isn't there?
Trust, absolutely, again. But trust never can happen overnight. So again, you have to understand where your close relationships are, together with the opportunities, because relationships on their own don't mean anything. You have to have a value proposition again. And if you can manage to match those two things and capital, then you're there.
All right, when will we hear more about Tanto? When will the news break?
Hoping to have that happen within Q1 next year, Q1 next year.
Are you going to have like a big opening?
We hope to.
Big
We hope
party?
to. We will definitely invite you. Yeah, absolutely.
I can MC the party.
in both in London and in Istanbul.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Larry.
Wonderful.
It's a pleasure.
I want to thank my guest, Ozan Ozkural, for joining us today. Hey, pay attention. It's coming. Tanto Capital.